Well, I think there's no sense that a 1% pay cap is the law of the Medes and Persians, which has to be in place for all time. This is quite a limited decision today. It applies only to 2 sectors. It's very sensibly not built into the baseline for the future. It's 1% additional, not consolidated as a one-off payment. But what we sometimes leave out of account is the fact that many public sector workers have not been subject to a strict 1% pay cap anyway. They've been getting automatic increases from year to year. And of course, when you look at total reward, not just the pay, but everything comes with pensions, all the terms and conditions that public sector workers have, then on average, they are and have been for quite some time better paid than workers in the private sector.
Well, and I think Chris Phelps was making that point in the film, but just to steer us a little bit with what you're hearing today, for an architect of austerity, does this seem like the right time to now be moving ahead to say, OK, the deficit is under control, we can do this now? Well,
no, I mean, the deficit is clearly not under control.
Should they be doing this?
Well, we are at the end of quite a long period, or in quite a long period of sustained economic growth, and yet we still have a budget deficit that is too big. We should be at this stage in a place where the budget deficit has been eliminated and we're getting towards a surplus. We're not. And so the idea that there is suddenly lots of money around is complete fantasy. My concern is actually we need to be much more focused on what we're getting for the money that we spend. We showed in the coalition government from 2010 to 2015 that you could get more for less. This was regarded as impossible, and yet we cut the running costs of government by cumulatively over £50 billion in 5 years, and yet actually the quality of public services, if anything, improved in that
I know
time.
that Anneliese will have a lot to say about that point in particular. I will come to you in a second, but just let me try and get a sense. If this then opens the lid, as Nick suggested, to all public sector workers,
which it clearly will,
and that's an OK thing, that's a good thing.
Well, I think it's whether it's good or bad, it's inevitable. You can't lift it for a couple of sectors.
But are you happy?
All the signals have been... No, I'm not happy that we are giving the impression that we can suddenly spend money to alleviate a particular political pressure point.
I mean, you built a reputation, didn't it? Your party built a reputation on saying, we have got to get this right. You know, financial, economic stability and responsibility before anything else. Does that risk...
Well, Pay rates are not the be-all and end-all. What matters is how much are you spending and what are you getting for it. The Treasury have always used pay rates as an important regulator of public spending. What they should be much more focused on is actually what are we getting for the money. And that drive to efficiency that I was happy to lead during the coalition government, the foot's been taken off the accelerator on that. And that's where the focus needs to be, getting back the drive to efficiency, because, you know, there may well be a case for, increasing pay in particular areas where there is a recruitment and retention pressure.
Anneliese Dodds, you've been very patient there. From what you've heard, do you accept that this is something that has been achieved and you can move on because of the efficiency that the Conservatives managed?
Absolutely not. And I think the situation we have at the moment is of extreme shortage in many areas of our public services, particularly nursing, but also in teaching, many other parts of public service. And ultimately, the independent pay review bodies are able to look at factors when there are shortages and other issues and produce a recommendation. They've been in this straitjacket of 1% for the last few years. That hasn't been good for recruitment and retention. And, you know, when we talk about efficiency, really with many of these services, there's no fat left. We're cutting at the bone now. We're cutting away essential services. We've got patients who aren't being treated properly, potentially in dangerous situations because staffing levels are so low. We really need to see our public sector workers having the pay that they deserve.
Isn't the difficulty for Labour that you have well-respected bodies, for example, the IFS, accusing Labour of, I think their words were, pretending everything can be paid for by the same plans to tax the richest? It can't keep going round and round and round, that money.
Well, No, and actually Labour in this regard has been very, very clear about where we would get the funds from. I mean, even if you use the Conservative government's own figures on what they said that their pay cap would save, they said that it would save £1.25 billion a year. Of course, they've just decided that they've got £1 billion a year to give to the DUP for their deal. So actually, on their figures, we can afford this. But Labour anyway has set out in our programme, we set it out at the election exactly how we would pay for this. We used pretty conservative figures actually to set out what we thought the cost would be.
I wonder why you've done this, why the Conservatives have done this. The unions aren't happy. As you've said, a lot of public sector workers are now going to assume that the gates are open and they can ask for more. You're trying to move on to Labour's territory where, you know, you've already heard Jeremy Corbyn say today that, you know, Labour will be breaking the pay cap for all workers. You're not going to do it politically, so why would you? Isn't it a massive risk for your party?
Yes, I think it's a risk. I'm not so interested in whether it's a risk for the party. There are risks in this for the public finances. And, you know, at the end of it, you have to earn the money to pay wages. Anneliese is talking about the pressure on the staffing levels in some parts of the public sector. Well, this is said to be within existing budgets. So any extra money that's spent on pay levels...
So Anneliese, more money for...
Unless you find
more money
savings in the running
for fewer members of staff working in that. Is that's no equation you'd accept, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, I'm extremely concerned about the claims coming from government that this will be paid for from within existing budgets. I mean, people will be watching this and will be aware that in their areas, policing, for example, is already incredibly stretched.
We'll take the police, take the prison services. If they choose to strike now, we know that's technically illegal. Would you support them?
Well, I don't think anybody wants to have a strike. I think the whole point is that people have been pushed very far, that they're starting to talk about this. Labour has said we shouldn't have industrial action, we shouldn't be pushed into this situation because government should be actually listening to those public sector workers.
For those strikes, you presumably, as the party that would break the cap on workers, if they're not getting those rises, you would support them.
I think industrial action, where it's been voted upon properly, where the workers decide that that is the right thing and where they've democratically been consulted about it, that is their right ultimately. But I don't want us to have that strike. I want us to get to a situation where public sector workers are paid properly, and the government needs to listen to them and listen to the public because they're actually calling out for this change too.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for coming.